Welcome back, everyone. Super excited to jump back into Indian knowledge traditions with you. We're taking a deep dive into some sources about consciousness and emotions and well-being, and honestly, it's been pretty mind-blowing. Like the whole idea of mind, no mind, and peace being an emotion, and all this talk about cultivating pure emotions. It's definitely a whole new way of looking at things.
Yeah, IKT offers a really unique perspective on these things for sure. It encourages us to, connect grounded body awareness with transformed emotions and valid cognition, which I think is super fascinating.
For sure. So let's start by unpacking this whole idea of consciousness. From what I'm gathering from these sources, it seems like the IKT perspective is that consciousness is not just in our brains, but it's kind of everywhere, like it's influencing everything.
Absolutely. IKT describes consciousness as sort of like overflowing. It extends beyond just the individual to like social and cultural realms. Think of it like a shared awareness that connects all of us.
Wow. So it's like not just me thinking my thoughts, but something much larger. I mean, does that suggest that we're like less separate from each other than we tend to think?
It definitely challenges, that classic Western idea of the isolated self. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the concept of social neuroscience and
Yeah.
that whole discovery of mirror neurons. You know how our brains react similarly, whether we're doing something or watching someone else do it.
That's pretty wild when you think about it. Okay, and then there's this whole idea of mind, no mind, or man on mana. What exactly is that all about?
So mind no mind refers to this ability to kind of like move fluidly between focused thought and just pure awareness. It's a state of mental stillness and clarity. Imagine being able to just tap into that stillness whenever you need to, even in the middle of, the craziness of everyday life.
Like a mental off switch, but you're still present.
Yeah.
I was reading about nirodha in yoga, which is like progressively losing awareness for longer periods of time. Is that related at all?
Exactly. Through practices like Nirodha, you gradually minimize your mental activity until you can experience these extended periods of just pure awareness. It's not about zoning out, but achieving this super refined state through dedicated practice.
Yeah. So it seems like the goal isn't necessarily to escape the world, but to kind of integrate this awareness into our everyday lives. From your experience, are there any practical ways that people can cultivate that mind, no mind state outside of, say, formal meditation?
That's a great question. I think it's really about, finding these moments of stillness throughout your day. Like maybe it's taking a mindful walk or focusing on your breath when you're, washing the dishes or just pausing to appreciate the beauty around you. Even these small intentional practices can really make a big difference over time.
That makes a lot of sense. So moving on to emotions. IKT seems to view emotions differently than maybe we're used to, not just as positive or negative, but as like tools for transformation. That's a really interesting concept.
Right. IKT introduces shanta, which is peace, not just as like the absence of conflict, but as like a powerful foundational emotion. You can think of it as, the bedrock upon which other emotions can be experienced and transformed.
Oh, wow. So you're saying peace is an active state, not just a passive one. I never really thought about it that way.
Exactly. And then on top of this foundation of peace, you have bhāvanā, which is the intentional cultivation of pure emotions. It's about working with your emotions and refining them and using them for personal growth.
That reminds me a lot of the concept of rasa in Indian aesthetics, where emotions are transformed into a shared experience of joy and insight. It's like taking your own personal emotions and turning them into something beautiful that you can share with others.
I love that connection. The Rasa framework is really helpful for understanding how, like, the same emotion that causes suffering in life can be transformed into joy and insight through art. Think about like a tragic play. You might feel sadness, but it's like a shared, elevated sadness, a collective experience of beauty and meaning.
It's almost like alchemy, turning lead into gold. But how do we actually apply that to our daily lives? Can we really transform challenging emotions into something beneficial through this lens of rasa?
I think it is a practice for sure. IKT says, that emotions, even like difficult ones, are full of energy, like we were talking about Rasa with art, right? So if we can approach our own emotions in the same way, like with that observation, maybe we can, find the beauty or the lesson in them instead of just getting swept away.
That's a really fascinating perspective. It makes me think about how IKT looks at cognition in general. You sent me some material about pramā, which I think is like valid cognition.
Yeah.
So is that basically about seeing reality clearly? But I feel like most people already think they're doing that anyway.
Right. That's kind of the tricky part. IKT suggests that our perceptions are often clouded by, all sorts of biases and preconceived notions. Prama is about cultivating a clear, unbiased view of reality.
So how do we actually go about cultivating pram? Like, are there any practices we can do to help us see through the fog, so to speak?
Well, IKT talks a lot about the importance of like refined attention. They call it dharan. It's not just about focusing, but about cultivating this like deep, unwavering awareness. And that helps us cut through all the distractions and really perceive, the true nature of things.
So it's almost like training our minds to be more like a finely tuned instrument, to
Yeah.
be able to pick up those subtle nuances and see past the surface.
Exactly. And IKT actually offers a bunch of different practices to help with that. Everything from meditation and mindfulness to the use of like mantra and yantra and tantra. These practices work by engaging our whole being, like the body, mind, and senses, in this pursuit of valid cognition.
I'm kind of curious about mantra, yantra, and tantra. Could you maybe talk about those a little bit more? I mean, I've definitely heard those terms before, but I'm not sure how they exactly fit into this framework of refining attention.
Okay, well, think of them as tools to kind of like direct and amplify your attention. So with mantra, you're using the repetition of sacred sounds to quiet the mind. Yantra is about using visual symbols and geometric patterns as focal points for meditation. And then there's tantra, which is often misunderstood, but it's actually a system of practices that work with the body's energy to transform consciousness and enhance cognitive function.
It sounds like IKT takes a much more holistic approach to cognition than the typical Western view, which tends to focus mostly on the brain.
Absolutely. IKT recognizes that our physical, mental, and energetic bodies are all interconnected, and they all play a role in how we, perceive and understand the world around us.
And this whole idea of interconnectedness sort of brings us to another really fascinating aspect of IKT, which is the perspective on the social self. From what I understand, IKT doesn't really see the social self as separate from consciousness, but rather like a pathway to a deeper understanding.
That's right. Instead of seeing the self as this isolated entity, IKT really emphasizes our inherent connection to others and to the world around us. And the concept of bhakti is super important here. It's often translated as devotion, but, it's not just about religious worship. It's a form of rasa, where love and devotion become like pathways to transformation.
So it's almost like connecting to something larger than ourselves through this love and devotion, and through that connection,
Yeah.
Experiencing a more expansive sense of self.
I think you put that beautifully. And this also ties into this idea of an ownerless social self, which is about acting with compassion and fellowship without that, ego attachment. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our well-being is intertwined.
It makes me think about the whole concept of dharma, like fulfilling one's purpose in life through right action.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual fulfillment, but about realizing you're part of a larger web of life.
Yeah.
And your actions impact that whole.
Yes. Dharma is all about living in alignment with our true nature, which is inherently, interconnected and compassionate. It's really different from that individualistic focus we see in a lot of Western approaches, where the emphasis is more on personal achievement and self-interest.
That's a really profound shift in perspective. And this leads us nicely to the last theme I wanted to explore today, which is everyday creativity. It seems like IKT views creativity not just as a form of self-expression, but also as a path to well-being and to, a deeper understanding of ourselves.
I think you're spot on. IKT emphasizes the importance of kind of weaving creativity into our daily lives. It's not just about, creating art, but about approaching life with a sense of playfulness and curiosity and an openness to new experiences.
One of the examples from the sources that really resonated with me was Rangoli, that ephemeral art that's created every day in India. It's such a beautiful example of ownerless creative expression. It's not about recognition or fame, but just creating for the pure joy of it and to share beauty with the community.
It really embodies the whole IKT ethos,
Yeah.
It's about connecting with your own inner creative spark and just letting it flow freely without being attached to the outcome. And that, in turn, cultivates positive emotions and resilience and a greater sense of well-being.
It's almost like Rangoli is a visual representation of rasa, transforming emotions into something beautiful and shared. I love that. It actually reminds me of something my grandmother used to say. She always said, always leave things more beautiful than you found them.
Oh, that's a beautiful sentiment. And it really gets at the heart of what IKT is all about. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, cultivating our inner potential, and then using that potential to create a more beautiful and harmonious world.
It's incredibly inspiring. So if we cultivate all of these qualities like mindfulness and emotional awareness and creative expression, are we essentially moving closer to understanding our true nature, to embracing that interconnected consciousness that IKT talks about?
That's a really powerful question. And I think IKT encourages us to explore that question through direct experience. By putting these principles into practice, we're not just gaining knowledge, but we're embarking on this journey of self-discovery, a journey back to our true nature.
It's a journey that invites us to embrace our power. You say, not power over others, but the power to create and to connect and to live a life that's full of meaning and purpose. It feels like we just scratched the surface of IKT.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've already learned so much. What are your main takeaways from everything we talked about today?
What really strikes me is that IKT doesn't just give you like a philosophy. It gives you this practical framework for how to live your life. It's all about how we integrate these really powerful concepts into our daily lives so that we can, live more consciously and more creatively and more compassionately.
Yeah, it definitely is like an invitation to embrace your power, like we've been saying. It's all about recognizing the power we have to shape our experiences and our relationships and even the world around us.
You've got it. It's not about power over other people, but the power to create things and to connect with others and to live a life that's really in line with our true nature.
So for all of our listeners out there who've been with us on this journey, what would you say are the key takeaways from our deep dive into IKT?
Well, we started off talking about consciousness as this really expansive force that kind of overflows the boundaries of the individual. And then we explored how emotions aren't really good or bad, but they're more like tools for transformation, with peace, as you know, the foundation.
Right, and we can't forget about pramā, which is all about seeing reality as it truly is. And that requires cultivating this, refined attention through practices like mantra and yantra and tantra.
And at the end of the day, it's all about recognizing that we're not isolated. We are interconnected beings, and we're all in this together, living in accordance with our dharma and expressing our true selves through that everyday creativity.
I love how IKT kind of weaves all these concepts together into this, holistic tapestry of understanding. It's not just about, knowing stuff. It's about embodying these principles and living them out in the world.
Yeah, and that's the real power of IKT, I think. It's not just an intellectual thing, but it's a transformative journey. It can be a real path to living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. We've explored all these concepts together, but now it's your turn. What really stood out to you from our conversation about IKT? What feels most relevant to your own life and to your own journey?
Yeah, take some time to sit with these questions. How can you apply these principles to your own life experiences? How can you embrace your power to create positive change in your life and in the world?
Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of IKT. It's been such a pleasure to explore all of this with you. We'll see you next time. Keep exploring and keep growing and keep embracing your power.